Okay, I'm getting a bit annoyed with Twitch now. I'm not dropping any frames at all. It is just a straight disconnect from the, well, one end or other is saying to you that bye, and it's not dropping frames. There's 0 errors. So I'm sorry about that, guys. I think if it does it again, what I'll do is I will switch which server I'm sending the stream to in Twitch, and I'll send it to one of the other ingest servers, and we'll see whether we actually get a better service out of them. What I was saying is, whilst I'm carving this flat now, before I finish this piece, what I will probably do is come back in and carve the curve of the wing membrane in afterwards. So although I'm putting quite a bit of detail in, we're not quite at the final carving stage. This is still sort of not exactly roughing out, but it is actually still defining the shapes. And sort of getting those right in block. Okay. I'm using the U-shaped gouge here because it's the only the large gouge. It's the only other tool that's narrow enough to get into this area here, and I want to avoid using the really tiny gouge to do this. But the fact it's a wider gouge does make it a little bit easier to avoid the creating little channels, which is what happens with the small U-shaped gouge. So I get a smoother surface. And I can actually cheat with this chisel, because with it having quite steep sides, I can turn the chisel on its side, and I get a slightly flat edge, because literally it's shaped like a U. So there's 2 straight sides and a curved bottom. So by turning it literally on its side, I can kind of use it like a small flat chisel. I'm not really using the chisel sort of properly in doing that, but for the purposes of this, which is just smoothing out, it does the job quite well. What I really ought to do is buy myself some more, a couple of new chisels, a smaller flat chisel, and possibly a smaller version of one of these flat gouges. These are still a U-shaped gouge, but as you can see they're a lot flatter. Sorry, too much lights in the wrong place. They're a lot flatter, and therefore they're a lot better to use in these small areas, shall we say, than the U-shaped gouge, the U one. But I'd need a narrower one to get into the space. Alright, well, I'm still not happy with that. I need some more some more depth around here on this bone, just around that the joint there, and this early part of the bone here. I've not quite gone down deep enough. I'm using a U-shaped gouge here against the side of the bone because I don't want a right angle join between the bone and the membrane. I want a curve at the very bottom there, so by using the U-shaped gouge, I actually, obviously the U at the bottom, I get a curved transition between the bone and the wing membrane. Okay, that's created a channel there, and I can now go in with the flat chisel and remove some of the excess material. No, that depth's not too bad there. So I shall round the bone off a little bit, which will help me decide if the wing membrane is actually deep enough. Again, I'm saying, but generally speaking, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not really in the final carve at this point. I shouldn't really be doing details like rounding off this bone at this particular stage, but I don't have enough experience of carving to know what's right, what's wrong. So I am kind of indulging in a little bit of detail at this stage because it's helping me to progress further. And helping me to avoid mistakes. In actual fact, there's no right or wrong way to do carving. You know, if you want to do detail right at the start, you do detail right at the start. But generally speaking, in most art forms, you start with a rough outline and you work more and more details into the piece until you actually finish with the really fine details at the end. And the same is relatively true for, you know, for painting, for example, or other things as well. Right, I know this finger bone is too thick, but I'm going to leave it for the moment. As I mentioned earlier on in the stream, this wood is relatively fragile, so whilst I want the fingers to be finer, if I do it too much at this stage, I'll end up with a very thin piece of wood which I can easily knock off, and I don't want to knock it off. So leaving it thicker than I actually want it provides some support to start with, and only when we finish messing around that area will I shave it down even more into its final shape. I could almost do with a reverse U gouge. That's with a chisel you can always tell which is the cutting edge. The cutting edge is always the one that's opposite the bevel. So this is the cutting edge. On a U-shaped gouge, the bevel is here on the bottom, so the cutting edge is the top. So you hold them at an angle to the wood. You can actually get reverse gouges, so effectively the bevel's on this side, on the inside of the U, so you hold the chisel that way, so it curves downwards, and that's quite a useful thing when you're wanting to round something off, is to have a chisel that's actually shaped, you know, rounded in that direction. It's often called reverse gouges or reversed chisels. Otherwise you have to do it as I'm doing it here with a flat chisel, and essentially what you're doing is you're creating lots and lots and lots of if you take a square, you cut the corner off, you cut the corners off, you cut the corners off, and eventually you approximate a circle or a curve. And that's what I'm doing here with this flat chisel, is I'm just kind of approximating the curve by keep cutting the corners off until I'm sort of happy with the shape that I've established. I'm getting a little bit of help here with making this curve, because I drew on where the wing bones were going to go, so you can see the dark mark on the top, or hopefully you can. It's sort of there just around here, but you should be able to see these lines here. And as I'm carving, I'm gradually carving away the mark that I made, so it's making it a little bit easier to see what I'm doing. So it can sometimes help to take something like a pencil, for example, and just make, draw on the edge like that you're wanting to remove, and then you can, as you carve it or shave it as I'm doing here, those pencil marks disappear and you can see what you've done or what you haven't done. Feel also is a really good one to do. To feel the wood that you're working on. I can tell, for example, I've got a point or a ridge here because I can feel like a sharp edge, which means I've got to do a little bit more carving here if I want to make it feel like it should be round. Fingers can be quite sensitive. I'm quite a tactile person anyway, so I enjoy touching the wood, but you can actually feel bumps and angles quite easily sometimes when you're doing this, when you can't even see them. So it's always good to just run your fingers over it, which will help enormously if you're trying to smooth something off, or in my case create a smooth round curve. By feeling it, I can tell whether I've achieved that. I've got a flat top here, for example. Now I can actually see that in this particular case, but there are times when I can't. I've got a sharp ridge again here just around this joint. And I've now moved that to one side, which is there. That's not bad. I've now got a sharp edge up this edge here, but I'm going to leave that and move on to working on one of the other bones now. I'm actually going to reposition this this piece a little bit as well. Okay. I'm going to try and clamp this just down here. Now the clamp may get in my way, so I might have to move it. But it's only a relatively narrow throat on this clamp, and whilst I'd like to clamp it up at the where I had it earlier, I can't get the clamp to reach that far into the desk. Now the clamp isn't particularly tight. This piece of wood is actually on a non-slip mat, so the clamp really is just applying a little bit of pressure, just enough for the mat to work its magic. And again, now coming back in here with this tiny U-shaped gouge, because it's the only one I can get into this space, and I've got to carve down to the level of the membrane between these two bones. Now I'm virtually, in fact probably I'm not going to be able to use any other chisel in this area here because the space is so small. And that's kind of one of the lessons I'm learning in doing this particular piece, that perhaps what I should have done is draw it to allow me a little bit more space to get in with some of the other tools. It's one of those things which in hindsight I should have done, I should have thought about. I didn't, so now I have the challenge of working around the problem I caused myself. I mean, it's not as though I wanted a 100% perfect representation. This is just an interpretation of the drawing. or the artwork. So I could have drawn this dragon any which way I wanted, really. So if you get the choice when you're carving, think about how you're going to carve it before you settle on the design. Just little things can make things a lot easier, or alternatively, if you don't think about them, they can get a lot harder. There's some areas around here, or for example, you can just see the back of the head here. There's a tiny gap at the back of the head. If I'd have thought about it, I should have made that gap a bit larger, moved the head over, or moved this wing bone over a little bit perhaps, which would have made carving behind the head a heck of a lot easier. I didn't think about that, and I had a heck of a problem carving that area out. Next time, if there is one, it'll be something I'll think about and hopefully get right next time. Now, if anybody is watching me and being a bit worried about the fact that I'm carving towards myself with a very sharp chisel, this chisel would not have any problems digging into me. You might be feeling a little bit sort of nervous about me doing it, but I can assure you it is a safe practice. I know that there will be a lot of people who have used sharp knives and things like that, and will be aware of shall we say the rule that says you never cut towards yourself. Well, I would say to you, if that's crossing your mind, that's not, it's not a rule, it's a guideline. And it's a guideline which is usually given to people who are unfamiliar with using extremely sharp tools, and it's a very good guideline, and it's a really good one to work to keep in mind anyway. And rather than trying to explain to beginners when you can override the rule, why is it a guideline rather than a rule? It's almost always just given as a rule in all sorts of walks of life where sharp tools are used, because generally speaking, if you can avoid cutting towards yourself, you avoid the obvious problem of the sharp tool ending in you rather than in the work that you're doing. But once you're familiar with the tools, I mean, here for example, I'm holding the tools very securely with my right hand. I'm not using my arms to drive this chisel, I'm using my fingers to drive the chisel. And if you look, if I don't move this hand at all, which I'm not moving it, I can only drive the chisel so far. I really cannot get that anywhere near me, and so it is largely safe to do that. It is still possible, if I let go with this hand and do the same thing, that this chisel will go somewhere I don't want it to go, but that's the point about me keeping a good solid hold with this hand and driving with this. I wouldn't, for example, use a mallet to drive this chisel towards me. That would be dangerous, because I couldn't guarantee keeping hold of the chisel when I drove the mallet, and of course then it becomes a projectile. So it's a safe practice to do this using a hand tool. It's not a safe practice to do it using a mallet. Of course, if I was doing this with this wood piece rested on my chest, I wouldn't be doing it anyway at all, full stop. But it's a good foot away from the nearest part of my body, so again, I am I'm aware of what the risks are, and I am mitigating those risks, and therefore what I'm doing is considered safe. Actually, the wing membrane around here is quite a complex shape, or would be quite a complex shape, because of all the curves involved and the angles as we go around the side and down. I'm not going to try and work out what it should look like. What I'm going to do is look at it and go, I like the way that looks, and therefore I will leave it, as opposed to trying to accurately represent what it would look like in real life. That's one of the things as being the artist, if you like. Sometimes you will avoid, you won't go by what something should look like, you'll go by what looks right, just because it looks better that way. Unless you have a particular reason that you must do something in a way that is 100% accurate. And what I do also have to remember in doing this wing membrane is it's joined along the bottom of the hand, and you've got knuckles or joints at positions like here, here, here and here, and if you bend at that point, then the membrane will go sort of flat, if you like, to the joint, and then go flat away from it. Now I'm exaggerating that a little bit because there are curves involved, but the membrane wouldn't go from here to the tips of my fingers in a straight line. It will actually come out and follow roughly the profile of the bend of the fingers, and I've got to remember to do that when I'm carving here as well, because it doesn't, if you don't do that, regardless of what it should look like, if you carve in a direct line from the palm here to the fingertips, it just doesn't look right. But in this particular case, sort of what looks right and what should be there kind of coincide. So, but it is something to bear in mind. It's very easy to make the mistake, and I say it's very easy because I did it when I did this wing. In fact, I did it about 3 times when I did that wing, and each time I had to recarve the wing. Right, so when I go down the side here, I don't actually really know what I'm going to do down here. So I'm going to carve it as though it's a working surface. Sort of in relief carving. The sides are not as important as the face, and so in fact, I very rarely do I carve down the side of an object, so I'm not that sure about what I'm doing. And it is caught, because I'm going completely across the grain here, because this wood, the layout of this wood is such that this was the tree trunk, so curved around here, if you like. I don't know which is the top or the bottom of the tree, I'm not sure, but so what I'm doing is at the moment I'm carving, if you like, into the trunk of the tree towards the centre of that tree. Yep. So I think I might be carving from the centre outwards, I'm not quite sure where this piece was, but I'm carving literally across the end grain, and carving across end grain can be interesting. Got a very narrow area around here as well, which I have to be careful of. As I say, mentioned earlier, this wood is not particularly strong, and because this is quite narrow here, it will be very easy to break it off. If I do break it off, it's not the end of the world. It has happened on some of the other fingers. I'd like to retain it if I can. I kind of like the shape, but if I lose it, well, that's just one of the things I have to deal with. It's a bit of an awkward angle to get in, and I'm aware you guys can't actually see what it is I'm doing down here. Just wondering if I can use the other gouge a little bit. Yeah, that helps. If while you're carving your chisel comes to a dead stop and doesn't seem to want to go any further, it's always worth checking to see if you're doing something wrongly, like carving in the wrong direction, rather than just using more force. As I mentioned earlier, you get quite a lot of feedback from the wood, and sometimes the fact that the chisel stops unexpectedly is because you're working against the grain of the wood in some way, and using excess force at that point could actually, again, as I mentioned before, just rip a section of wood away that you don't want. So it's always worth checking before you apply extra force. Okay, that's a bit of an awkward area around there now. One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the last wing bone there. This area around here is waste wood. I've left it to support the thumb for the moment because again, it's fragile. So that area there is waste wood. That's got to go away. I'm debating whether to do some of that now or to leave it a little while. I do have to do some work around this bone here, however. Oh dear, that made me jump. Justin936, you made me jump. Thank you very much for following the studio. That is wonderful of you. Thank you very much. I do appreciate you doing that, and everybody else who chooses to follow as well. There's been 2 or 3 people followed this evening. If you're still watching, I would say you're watching me carve at the moment, but carving isn't the only thing I do on stream. This is a fairly lengthy carve. It's already been about almost 3 weeks worth of carving so far, but I do undertake other arts and crafts on the stream. Pyrography is one of the things that I do on stream. Pyrography, if you're not aware of it, is creating images with heat. So I use a tool somewhat like this one to create on wood actually, and the heat actually cooks the resin or the sap in the wood and causes a colour change, and you can create images, monochrome images, using that. So something like, for example, this is a pyrographic image of a pussycat. It's actually a black and white cat, so it's I won't say it's easy, but it's easier in that there's not so many shades. But that's a pyrographic image. I also, as I said, used to look at me doing carving here. I do an art form called scraperboard. What scraperboard is essentially a board. Well, it's cardboard covered with a thin layer of porcelain clay, which is then coated over the top with dark black Indian ink. And you use sharp tools like a scalpel or even one of these blades to scrape away the black ink to leave the white china clay showing through. So you again create a monochrome image by using what they call half toning techniques, but it's basically scratches of white and black. I also do something called punchcraft, which is a bit like miniature rug making. You punch holes in a material, pushing a thread through and create a loop of thread, and you can create pictures using that. I just finished a piece on Wednesday using punchcraft. I also just started doing some chainmail jewellery work as well. Now you may see me do that tomorrow afternoon. If I stream tomorrow afternoon, that'll be what I'll be doing tomorrow afternoon. That's afternoon in the UK. And basically I like trying out new art forms, so I do quite a few varied things. Quite a few art forms planned for the future, which I can't do at the moment because of space constraints, but I am really hoping that at the back end of this year I should have somewhat larger studio space, and then I can do things like airbrushing. I can do some glass engraving. I even have a 3D printer to build, which I will do on stream. I can do rug making. I do make rugs, 2 different types of rugs, latch hook and punch rugs. I do those. And well, whilst I do some other art forms like cross stitching and tapestries, I suspect they will be a little bit too boring to do on stream because they are a relatively slow art form. And I also have some plastic fuse beads, which I want to try and do something on stream with as well at some point. So I do kind of hop from material to material or craft to craft. So you will see quite a variety of stuff over time on the stream. Generally speaking, I try and stick to one thing at a time, so we'll finish the carving before I do my next pyrography piece. I think that's the next thing that's scheduled to be done, and we'll finish the pyrography piece before we move on to doing some scraperboard, for example. I think I want that a bit deeper, especially just around the joint here. So you're not seeing a lot of progress really here. It's quite a small area, this chisel. It doesn't take a lot of material off, and indeed I'm trying my best not to take a lot of material off. I am really just trying to shave some of the sections down. I don't want to create deep grooves because they're really hard to get out with this particular chisel. So I am somewhat just taking very small shavings off, and unfortunately that's not really greatly visible to you guys, but I am making progress. Unfortunately you'll just have to trust me on that one. Okay, that's not so bad. So I'm going to do now is round off this bone so we can take a look at what it looks like. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do down here. This area of wood here is really rough. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to carve a smooth surface onto it. That's not bad. Using my fingers to be able to tell whether I've got high spots or sharp edges. And by sharp here I don't mean sort of finger cutting sharp, I mean just an angle more than anything. As I'm trying to create a rounded shape, I don't want to be able to feel any ridges. I do have one on a flat top as well. Oh dear. Mabler2907, thank you very much for following the studio. I really do appreciate you doing that. Thank you very much. I'm glad you're enjoying what you're seeing. If anybody's got any questions, by the way, I'm hoping chat is working, so feel free to ask. I don't mind. I have mentioned quite a few of other crafts that I do, so if you want to ask any questions about those, you're quite welcome to do so. You don't need to wait until I'm actually doing it to ask. Now this area around the knuckle is a bit thick. I'm not fantastically happy. I mean, your knuckles are thicker, but it doesn't look right to me. And this is one of those situations where not looking right overrides what should actually be there, which is a thick knuckle. outside edge here is also somewhat thick, so we'll just shave that down a little bit. Again, I'm working more details than I perhaps should be doing at this stage, but what the heck. To me, that's doing the carving. One of the main reasons early on for not doing detail is things like for example, on this wing, I made a mistake. The only way to correct that mistake was to carve everything further down into the wood, and in doing that, any details that I put on the surface got lost. So if you do a lot of fine details really early on, then what you end up having to do is do them again. If you have any reason to change what you're doing, as I did, because of a mistake. So there is sort of good reasons why you don't want to be doing details too soon. But we hopefully won't be making that level of mistake again. Now we are sort of close to the final shape, so putting the odd sort of detail now isn't a fantastic problem. I have a ridge just around there. Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes you can't see it, but you can feel it. And with carvings are one of those things that people do tend to put their hands on if it's within reach. Same with sculptures really, but there's something about a 3D object that people like to put their hands on. So things like the wrong shape, and I know there's one here as well, just stand out and don't feel right. And I could go on and do that, but I'm not going to. Now then, I've got a bone around here to shape. Okay, I'm getting feedback from the wood that's not happy about me carving in that direction, so we'll try it in this direction. 9/9. Thank you also for following the studio. That is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. I am glad you're enjoying what you're seeing. The wood here is not greatly happy with me cutting it in this direction. It feels a little bit spongy, which is kind of a feedback to me that something's not quite right, but I've only got a limited range as to quite how I can carve things in here, because I can't get in too close because of this thumb that's here. So I have got some slight restrictions. Yeah, this direction is actually the preferred direction. The wood sounds different, and it feels a lot more solid, not the spongy feel I had on the other side. Again, I'm carving off the side, guys, which is probably difficult for you to see. Can't really give you a better view, I'm afraid, because my hands or arms will be in the way either way. Now, one of the things I am going to do before I finish this piece is I am going to undercut these wings. And by undercutting, what it means is I'm going to carve that way. So when you sort of look, if you like, just slightly off straight down on this piece of wood, you would actually see sort of shadow or darkness under it here, giving the impression that the whole wing actually is detached from the wood. It won't be, but that sort of back cut is kind of an optical illusion, and that's one of the things I'm going to be doing. So this top edge will actually get fully carved, probably quite a nice round shape. Okay, let's do this bit of the finger. Certainly when you're trying to create a curved shape, as I'm doing here, a rounded shape, it's amazing just how much a little tiny sliver of wood can make a difference. You can be shaving off the minutest parts, but it can make a significant difference to whether something feels round or whether you can feel a sharp point. Talking of sharp points, this joint here feels like an elbow more than a finger joint. No, that's better. I can't do much more until I start to work at undercutting that there. So probably leave that wing for a little bit and move on now to doing some of this mountain pinnacle he's stood on, and the tail. I'd love to be able to leave this tail sort of free floating in air, but if I do that it'll crack off. So what I'm going to do is wrap it around the mountain peak. That means I've got to reposition this piece of wood again. 84 Guy, good evening. Welcome to the stream. How was your stream this evening? I think you were streaming a Warhammer game, I believe. For those of you that are not familiar with 84 Guy, AD, as I just mentioned, is also a streamer. He streams games on a regular basis, but AD also streams making chainmail jewellery. Wednesday evening generally, I believe, if I remember correctly, is when you do that, and sometimes in afternoons as well in the UK. Great thing to watch, amazing to see the skill that goes into making little tiny rings go into unbelievably complex patterns and come out looking like a really nice piece of jewellery. So I highly recommend you checking out 84 Guy. Yep, that's it. It has been really quite quiet tonight as well. I mean, I've also had Twitch disconnect me about 6 times, but it does seem to have been quite a quiet evening. Now then, I have to work out quite what I want to do here. Yeah, I want to make this at least look like it continues, so what I'm going to do is, when I'm applying here, is something called a stop cut. Its job is to stop the wood splitting when I start to run the chisel down the edge here, because if the wood starts to split, it will naturally stop where the cut is. Now I have to be really careful in doing this, because the chisel it's got a bevel on it, as you can hopefully, well, believe me, it's got a bevel like this on it, and of course that's a wedge. So if I drive this down too hard or too deep, the wedge will actually split the wood apart, and it's quite possible that this tail will just crack off. So I do have to be careful about doing it. It's one reason why I'm not taking my hand or a mallet to drive it down. So it does actually lead to me needing to do fairly shallow cuts here in removing waste material, because the stop cut that I've created is a shallow stop cut. What happens is, having done one, I just go in, create another stop cut. So it's small steps rather than great big chunks coming off, I'm afraid. And there you go, everybody who might be watching. There's a his schedule. So I do recommend you check him out. Fascinating thing to watch is chainmail being put together. Sorry, I say chainmail being put together, the jewellery using chainmail techniques put together, because I think most people, on hearing the word chainmail, think of armour, suits, knights and things like that. So whilst it is rings, which is what chainmail is made out of, there isn't much in the way of armour, although I'm sure if you were willing to pay for it, Eddie would be quite willing to make you a chainmail suit. Okay, thank you for trying that, Eddie. I would have tried it tomorrow, but I think I think what I'll probably end up with is just something like a simple 2 in 2, and maybe a little bit of colour variation across its length. I could probably do with getting some really small rings. I don't know. Maybe something like I don't know, 22 gauge, if it goes that small, and I don't know, 260. What would it be? Don't know, little tiny things anyway. And then doing a sort of a thicker weave, but because of the smaller size, it will look delicate. But I shall work with what I've got at the moment, and can always do another one. She keeps describing it as for her first one, she wants something fine and delicate. And it's that word, first, that keeps coming into the conversation. Not that I mind. If anybody's wondering, by the way, I did mention earlier on the stream, I have tried a little bit of chainmail. I was inspired by buying some pieces from AD to try it for myself, and whilst I'm nowhere near as skilled, I really did enjoy doing it, even with some very bad tools. And so I was, the pieces I bought were a present for my wife for her birthday, and I did try and make her a piece myself, and she very much liked it, and I enjoyed making it, so I'm going to try and do some more. It was quite okay. Then maybe that I'll try something like that, Eddie. It was quite funny tonight because she was, well, well, even me, somebody'll come up with something like, I don't know, you say something like a helm weave, and I'll now I know what one looks like, but I'm sure you could come up with a number of weaves. I haven't got the foggiest idea what that looks like, and so we're just doing some internet searches for pictures, and after about an hour looking just at pictures of weaves and jewellery and things like that, her comment was that she couldn't believe that with just a simple ring there were so many possible variations of the way you could put the things together to create the weaves and the patterns. That she was just absolutely amazed by it. And then when you add colour into the equation as well, right. As I start to cut this down, I'm starting to create a weak spot just around here, because that's the narrowest bit of this bit of wood that's here. So I'm either going to take real care in doing it, or at some point shortly I'm going to carve some of this away so that I maintain the strength of the thicker wood that's underneath it, just for the sake of safety. Whilst at this stage cracking the tail off would be annoying, I can still work around it. Start to crack it off around here, and it becomes a real problem. And if I sort of cracked it off smooth with this bit of background, then I'd be in even more trouble. So I've got to think ahead a little bit and just make sure that I'm not going to apply pressure into that area whilst I'm carving, and even between streams when it just sits on the desk. Do have to be a little bit careful. As we get down towards the final carve, I say it'd probably stand out about twice the height of these, so it will be reasonably well supported, so it wouldn't be as much of a problem in the final carve. I was just thinking then, I wonder how many of the people that that have never seen wood carving before perhaps came into the stream expecting to see wood chips flying all over the place, as that seems to be the archetypal image for somebody carving. Is bits of wood going all over the place with a great big hammer or chisel. I mean, what I'm carving here now, if you like, is a rock, so I'm not fantastically bothered about the surface texture here, because I will ultimately be roughing it up, so I don't have any real need to be particularly careful about getting it super smooth and flat. I do still have to watch out, as I say, for the correct grain directions and stuff like that. And it is also important for me to remember, or you might be sort of thinking, I'm carving in the right direction, but as you go down through the depths of the wood, sometimes the angle of the grain does change, and at the top level, the direction you're carving, when you get down to the bottom level, it may be that you need to carve in a completely different direction. So it's something you've not to neglect as you go down, is to keep thinking about whether you're doing it in the right direction or not. And as I said, if the wood were to split on me, or as long as I don't crack this tail off, I wouldn't be fantastically bothered about it, because I'm not after a super smooth texture here. I am on the background, for example. I want that as smooth as I can make it. That way I don't have to sand, because sanding actually changes the look, the surface texture of the wood. Whilst it sort of smooths it down, sanding does tend to fill in the pores, and you lose the shine that you get from a smooth carve. So I want to avoid needing to sandpaper this if I can do so. May need to do the odd space, like in here for example, where I can't get a chisel in properly, and if I have to do that, I have to do that, but so I want to try and avoid it if I can. Never, by the way, pull off slivers of wood that you've pulled up. So if I get something like this, don't pull it off, because that's quite likely to rip wood. Always cut it off with your chisel. A cut is a controlled movement. A pull or a rip is an uncontrolled movement, and uncontrolled is where the danger lies. I think I'm getting a grain change, direction change here. I've seen the wood starting to pull in the wrong direction when I was carving just then, so I may just have to be a little bit careful. I can afford to be a little bit rough carving this, just sticking the chisel in, because I'm fairly confident that I'm not going to put any pressure on the tail area. And I'm aware that the angle I'm carving at in respect to the grain is going to keep the chisel from digging in where I don't want it to dig in. Right, let's cut that down there again. So just removing, rapidly removing a little bit of waste material there that I don't want. Even I get bored with slow progress sometimes, even though I do have the patience to do this for quite a long time. Incidentally, I mean, I have been asked with this and other crafts whether I need a lot of patience to do it. And I would say, actually, no, you don't, because in my case, shall we say, I need patience when something isn't going right. It won't, you're trying to thread a needle, for example, and the thread just will not go through the eye of the needle. That's when I need patience. That's when the adrenaline starts to build up. We're doing something like this. Every time I move the chisel into the wood, I'm making a cut, some materials coming off. There's something going on all the time. I'm making progress, and I find that when I'm making progress, I don't need patience to make progress. And the other thing you get to in doing something like this is you don't actually realise the passage of time either. So it's not like patience is needed because it's going to take 60 100 hours to do, because that 100 hours just disappears really quickly. Every time I do a stream, for example, it's at least 2 hours long, or almost always 2 hours long. And even tonight I got to we started the stream at 8 o'clock in the UK. Got to 10 o'clock before I even realised it was that time. I know that's and that's just quarter of an hour ago now, so I normally do tend to stop around about 10 o'clock. I'm going on a little bit longer tonight, not for much longer I'm afraid, but I have just realised, of course, you can't even see that. No, I'm just trying to give you a better angle of what I'm looking at here. See if I can move the camera like that. So you can see a little bit better. In fact, what I'll do is just zoom the camera in a little bit more so that you can actually maybe see what I'm doing down here, because it's quite a wide shot. Yeah, the light's not fantastically good either. One of these days I'm going to get a ring light actually to go around the camera, or I'll make one, which then hopefully will give you some better lighting. Talking of which, I've realised it's got dark here in the UK, and I don't have any lights on in the studio here apart from this this one working light. So we'll turn the light on. And close the curtains. What was that from the from the blue ones, AD, or from the modified red ones? But a dead bio, that's quite an ingenious fix, is that? How did you manage to get it to stay in there? Kind of with the the red ones that I had, which were terrible, and they're still not much better. They're better, but not much better. I was kind of, if I'd have been able to get the spring out springs out altogether, at worst, what I would have perhaps done is just taken a piece of cotton, if you like, wrapped it around my little finger and around this this particular handle, so that the two were sort of joined together, so that I could open it just by moving my finger out. I've done that before with some needle nose pliers I've got when I've been doing electronics work, because there was no spring on the needle nose. It just needed a very small amount of pressure, just to open them, and that sort of thing was more than enough. Okay. I'm really surprised, but they broke then. Super glue. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that'd do it. I suppose. Yeah, epoxy resin, super glue. Yeah, super glue. Yeah, I'm gonna say yeah. The epoxy resin might work, but it probably wouldn't stay in place. So super glue them first, and then epoxy resin maybe to create a little bit more of a pocket. Actually, I'm thinking about it. I'm surprised you got the glue to stick at all, because generally speaking, these things have got a fine oil coating on them. And or did you stick it to the plastic? Normally, you have to sort of get an alcohol rub or something on something like this to get the oil film off before you can even stand a chance of sticking anything to metal like that. Now then, what's that profile look like there? Because I can't get in here very well at the back of this here to ideally I wanted to carve this area here. I'm in the male and shadow, aren't I? Ideally I wanted to carve this area here right down to the level of the backbone, but yeah, as in I didn't think about it before I started. The fact that the tail is here stopped me doing that, because I just can't get the chisel in. And so the compromise way to sort of avoid that is to treat this, this background here like a little bit more of the mountain that this dragon stood on, and therefore it doesn't need to go all the way down to the backbone. But of course I need to match the mountain on the outside here to this shape as well. Now once I carve this tail down a bit, I possibly can do some more in there, so it may well be that what we'll do is carve this outside to the same profile, carve the tail down, and then maybe carve the inside a bit more and do it again, but we shall see. Lizard Soul 87, good evening, welcome back to the studio. I would say you didn't just miss the Twitch notification, you probably missed about 6 Twitch notifications. Twitch has disconnected me about 6 times tonight, and reconnected. So I'm sure it probably not, sent out quite a few, or should have sent out quite a few stream notifications. Okay. One of the interesting things about carving this rock behind or mountain top is going to be to how to make it look randomly natural. It's fairly easy to sort of carve. He says, things like a dragon, a flat surface or whatever. But actually getting something truly random like like a rock might be, top of a mountain might be, could prove challenging for me. Now I am getting a little bit of a problem here trying to carve like this in this area because the tail itself is getting in my way. Again, not a fantastically problem, I guess, because I don't actually have to be, cleanly carved in this area. Because it's a rock formation. Alright. Well, it seems to be, I was watching, I got disconnected on the stream last night. I was watching somebody after my stream that got disconnected several times to the point where they just gave up, and it does seem somewhat annoying. I'm kind of cynical as well, because the thought that just crossed my mind is, never once did I see a stream disconnect while the adverts were playing. Now I know that's kind of just coincidence, but just my cynical brain. Now naturally you're going to expect a mountaintop to come towards a peak, so I don't really want to do this sort of coming out this direction. I've got to make it look at least like it goes in that sort of direction. So I'm just going to make sure I carve this outside edge down such that I get that sort of peak impression. Obviously you can't see the peak, it's underneath the body of the dragon. Okay, yeah, 84 guy. Yeah, I know what you mean. Which will help obviously keep it in place as well. Yeah, that's true. I don't think I've ever seen a partner disconnect. Is there some sort of tournament on or something at the moment? Or is it just such a nice day in the world that everybody's outside in the nice weather? It's not been too bad up here. I'm in Yorkshire in the UK. I do know earlier on today it was in here in the studio it was 30 degrees, which I must say is quite warm. And I've just realised I've kind of made a mistake in carving this. I've taken this edge off here. It's sort of a mistake because of the way in which the mounting top will come up. They don't tend to stick out at an acute angle like this before they come back in again. But it won't be too bad, I don't think. But it is sort of a mistake. I should have left some more material here. So I will have to do something about that. Right, yeah. Okay, Liz, it's so. What did you think to the site? I haven't bought a great deal from. I have bought some stuff from them before, but I haven't bought a great deal from them. Now to be a little bit careful around here that I don't actually go down below the level of the baseboard. I'm almost at that level here, so I don't want to go below it because I'd end up then having to well, I'd say end up, that's actually not true. Generally speaking though, you establish the level of the background, the plinth or the plaque or however you want to describe it, and the relief carve is in front of that background. There's no specific reason why you shouldn't also carve into that background area as well, like here for example with the mountain. It's just not often done. About the only time you see that sort of carve in effect is when you're doing things like the one I showed earlier on stream, where you're doing it for some particular reason. Like this one, for example, I've left the surface of the wood around the outside at the natural level, and we've carved in, and so we've sort of carved below the surface level. This was in this particular case it was done because this wood was so extremely difficult to carve into, it took so much effort that that's as far as I was prepared to do. I didn't want to flatten out the outside, but quite often, that's what this sort of effect is done. You'll see on things like architectural elements, like let's say a fireplace lintel across the top of the fireplace, where the surface of the wood is the front of the lintel, and then the objects are carved inside that area. You often see it in churches as well, on things like pews in churches. Not so much on the main architectural elements, but on things like that, and around the altar, the woodwork around altars. Oh, okay. Yeah, and for shipping costs always gets you. It's kind of the same for me if I buy stuff from the continent as well. Mind you, if you've got, I mean, you've got, as you say, you've got your local supplier there. As they actually obviously do buy chisels and things, they might be able to do a special order for you, Lizard Soul, if you're asking them for one that they don't actually stock, so that the next time they get an order, they can add the particular one that you're after to that order, so it's not costing them any extra to do that sort of thing. Now, the one I've got here is I've actually got a previous stop cut which has probably dug a little bit too deep into the edge there. And what I'm going to need to do, but I'm not going to do it at this stage, is probably just shave this area of the background down a little bit so I can lose that the cut that's there. So I'll actually have to shave down so I'm below the level of the cut, so that it's erased or it's vanished. I cut away the cut, but I need to do this background a little bit more before I do that, because I don't want to end up having to do it again. So let's do a little bit more shaping just around here on this. It's kind of nice for once here, not to be needing to ensure I keep a chisel dead straight, or that I cut a particular angle or something like that. It's I can just sort of create rough planes because that's it's a rock. Rocks don't have that many straight edges. And if I create odd angles in the wood, yeah, it's a rock. Having said that, I also don't want it too rough, you know, like you just split a log down the middle or something like that. That would look untidy. So I kind of need to have an untidy tidiness, or a tidy untidiness, and a smooth rough cut. It's coming along quite nicely. It's roughly consistent at this stage anyway with that. I'd like to take that down a bit. I'm probably going to lower this area a little bit as well. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to say that's enough for tonight. They may well do. Obviously lizard soul you can't tell until you ask them. But quite often shops are relatively willing, especially if it's stuff that they stock anyway, if you like. So them having an extra, if for some, well, they'll probably ask you for a deposit, I suspect, or at least, or maybe even to pay for it up front. But if they already stock that range, then they may well be willing to do that just anyway on sort of speculation for you, and then if you pay, because they can always sell it. Here I am folding up those, and I've left my handle out. Yes, especially if you get a skew chisel with a double bevel rather than a single bevel, because then it cuts from both sides. Yeah. You do know. I mean, these are flex cut. You do know flex cut make knives as well, don't you, Lizard? So, because if you're interested in knives more than chisels, I mean, if you see, you possibly may not have seen them on the sites, but you've got carving knives as well. This is a roughing knife. Which has got, well, for me it fits my hand quite nicely, and they are extremely sharp. So I'm being a little circumspect with that. So this is a roughing out knife, and heavy duty, relatively speaking, a heavy duty blade. Of a reasonable thickness. I also have here a detail knife. I only have two knives. It's a slightly different style of carving using knives to using chisels. Some stuff you can do interchangeably, some stuff doesn't work so well unless you've got a knife. And this is a detail knife. As you can see, it's a finer blade, and the tip is a lot finer, or a lot smaller, so you can get into the finer details. And that's probably actually a finer shape than the skew chisels are in the chisel range, and it's obviously designed to be held, to be used, like a hand, a detailed knife would be, I guess. And I suppose you can even use it a bit like a pencil here, but I'd want to be careful I held on to that quite well. These blades are really sharp. Oh yeah, no, I understand. There's all the dual use. I don't actually often use too much use a skew chisel. Not that I've got that much experience to say, yeah, that I shouldn't use it or anything like that. Yeah, you see, well, you see me mostly. I work with about 2 or 3 chisels. The skew chisel, I do. I use the skew chisel more when I want to slice. So there's certain areas which I was doing around here, for example, where the angle that I needed to cut at, I just couldn't get a chisel in. So you end up in those sorts of circumstances, you often end up trying using a knife-like action, even with the flat chisel. So I'd be using it like a knife, dragging it sidewards in order to overcome the angle of the grain. That's where a skew chisel comes in really well, because if you've got a skew chisel, which for those people that aren't familiar with what a skew chisel is, I've got one here. Skew chisel is like that, because the cutting edge is skewed, and when you push that in, if you push that straight forward, here for example, you are actually imparting a slicing action as opposed to a shaving action, which is what a flat blade does when you drive it straight forward. So this is a shaving action. This is a slicing action, and it actually affects the wood in slightly different ways. And this is quite useful when you're in an area where the grain won't let you use a shaving action too well. You can still use this to shave, you just have to push it sideways. But this is it's double beveled, which means it cuts either that way if you like, or I can turn it over and I can cut in that direction as well. I shall just put that back away safe. Well, I've been you talking about the replacing the blades. I haven't needed to replace the blade. Obviously it depends on quite how much you're doing. The harder the wood, you might need to replace the blade, I guess. And I mean, these can, if you were to try and sharpen these with a whetstone, for example, you've got a fair bit of material to go at, shall we say, before they become physically unusable. In a flat blade, the spoon shader, the spoon gouges, for example, you don't have as much material as next to nothing there. But I've been using I haven't done a great deal of carving, but I've been using these for 2 or 3 years now, and I've never needed to get as far as getting a whetstone out to sharpen them. So I kind of won't expect you perhaps to need to replace them that often, is it so? I'd be surprised if you needed to do it within about 5 years, unless you really really abuse them, and I doubt you're going to do that, especially as you want a detailed chisel. I'm not actually sure. I suspect actually the knives are actually more dangerous than a chisel. Naturally, with a chisel, you're either going to drive it away from yourself, which is what everybody sort of thinks, or you've got a risk of driving it towards you. But if you're doing it detailed wise, then you've got less of a risk. With a knife, you almost have no choice but to use it towards yourself. If I just get this one out, one of these days I'll get a bag for these. The natural way to hold the knife is like that. Now, when the whittling action, if you like, is to do that sort of action with it, but you've got very little control when you do that, believe it or not. Especially if most people will pick up a knife and they'll use the whole of the right arm and pressure from it, and essentially all you end up doing is splitting a lot of wood off. To carve with a knife, you've got to do really quite controlled movements. And have I got a piece of wood around here that will let me demonstrate? I've got this here. Okay, I've got this cat, for example, here. So what I wouldn't do with this is hold this and like this and just try and carve this away. What I do with this as a knife is I've got my thumb here, and and this thumb here is on the piece, so I'm supporting the knife and then positioning it then based on my thumb. What I'll then do is drive the knife forward with my left thumb, so my right arm is not actually putting any pressure on this knife other than to hold its angle. So you might see me just rotating it there to get the angle that I'm after, but I'm driving it using my thumb on my left hand. Now most people, until they actually get to learn carving, will do that. Now look where my finger is here. If I move that around there a little bit and I'm not watching it, that will cut me quite easily. But of course, a lot of the time when you're using these sorts of blades, you actually use them towards yourself. And here the technique is slightly different because I'm not using my left hand. My left hand's out the way here. I am using the curl action, if you like, on my right hand to drive. Hopefully what I was explaining to you was on camera, because I just realised I'm zoomed in quite a lot. I'm using the curve and I'm using my thumb against the piece to drag the knife backwards. I'm not using my arm. Again, my arm is only helping to control the angle. I'm not pulling with my arm, so I'm not doing this. I'm closing my hand. And as you can see, if I close my hand, the knife doesn't come near my right thumb at all. It just physically can't get there. So I don't have a lot of danger of cutting myself that way. But look where the blade is in respect to my left hand. Usually when you're using a knife, it's your left hand, if you're right-handed that is, that's in danger of being cut almost all the time. So I'm doing this, I'm driving with my with my right thumb, and there's not a lot of force being employed to do this. So that's but that's why the knives are generally more dangerous, because most people are not concentrating on the left hand, they're concentrating on the right hand, and this gets in the way. That's one reason why it's an extremely good idea, if I can find them, there it is, to have one of these. That's a Kevlar impregnated glove, or Kevlar woven glove. The black you can see in it is Kevlar fibres, and what that means is when you wear this, I'll put that knife down before I do myself some damage. When you wear this glove, holding a piece, and it's on my left hand, because if I do that with it, this glove resists the slicing action. I say resist, if you try hard enough you'll get through it. So if I catch myself, I'm not going to cut myself, and it has saved me cutting myself quite a few times as this glove. I've got a pair of them, but I only use it on my left hand. so it's a good investment. It won't stop a stab, by the way. So yeah, if I was to use a chisel to try and do something here, I could quite easily cut myself with a chisel because it's a stabbing action. Anyway. Okay, Eddie, good night. Have a good evening. Have a good night anyway. Um, don't, don't necessarily be put off them, Lizard Soul. You know, if it's the right tool for the job, it's the right tool for the job. If you see what I mean. Um, you know, if you haven't got one, you can't use it. But sometimes they're a better tool for the job. But it's really just about knowing how to use the tool. You know, you can cut yourself as just as easily with one of those chisels. I've cut myself with the chisels. I've cut myself twice now. Both times, putting the chisels away in the bag. And they're not serious. They're not being serious cuts or anything like that. But if I just get this out again. You know, if you're putting a chisel away in the bag here, for example, I don't know if you can, I don't know if you can see, but there's a chisel underneath here. Okay, and I've just caught myself the edge of my thumb or finger in one case, just on the edge of these. They're all extremely sharp edges, sharp corners, and I've just caught myself on the corner of them, and I've just nicked my skin, got a few drops of blood. But they're in a case, you know. It's not. I've not been driving a chisel and seriously hurt myself, but you know, I have cut myself with the chisels. So the danger is when you're not taking care, really, and I wasn't taking care. But anyway. You don't lose feel as such. I suppose if you had a really thick glove on for hand carving like that, but you know, when I'm carving, I'm talking about the feel of the wood, of the blade going through the wood. When you're using a knife, it's important because you can still split the wood, but you're using a slicing action which has got a different effect on the wood. And you know, whilst with those gloves are reasonably flexible enough. I could actually wear two, to be honest. I haven't tried it. It's your other hand that tends to be in danger, as I say, because the way you hold the knife, it's almost impossible to hurt your knife hand. I won't say it is impossible, that's because you can do it. And especially if you're trying really hard, putting a lot of force into something. But it's recognising, for example, if you're putting a lot of force into something, you shouldn't be, so you're doing something wrong. And once you avoid that situation, you take away a lot of the risk. Yeah. So feeling, I never actually experienced that. Certainly using those gloves. I have got some thicker Kevlar gloves, which is this one. It's a bit like a gardening glove, but these are Kevlar. This is a Kevlar impregnated surface as well, and this being rubberized can be quite useful sometimes. This is a lot thicker glove. But I haven't particularly experienced any real problem in using that as well. It's just a bit more tiring to use a thicker, because this glove has, as you can see, it's got a tendency to want to stay in that position, and so it's just a bit harder to use. That's all. And it's a little bit harder to grasp the smaller pieces with a stiffer glove, more than anything. But anyway, if you don't purchase a bag, there's no reason why you have to, and you could always make yourself something similar. I would certainly recommend that your chisels will come probably in a box like that then, or a packaging like that. Keep the packaging and put the chisels back in. This one, for example, goes back into the... I should put it in the other tool case, but I keep putting it back in this box. Keep them in there, because what you don't want is, you don't want that edge knocking against things, because that knocking against things destroys the edge. That's one thing about this pouch. The pouch is leather, and therefore when I close this, for example, whilst these may dig into the leather of course it cuts effectively, it absorbs the pressure, and it doesn't damage the edge of the chisel. Whatever you do, sort of throw a handful of chisels into a drawer or into a small box so they rattle against each other. Keep them separate, and it doesn't have to be leather. If you had a plastic case that you just put one of these things in, put a piece of foam at the sharp end, just to protect it against the banging against the edge of the box, that would do the same sort of job. But just put one in, don't put two in, where they can knock against each other. So it's just about remembering that edge is sharp, and it only stays sharp if you look after it. Your wooden box wouldn't be too bad, even if they sort of rattle against it, if you see what I mean, like that, because of course the wood will absorb the sharp edge, if you like. It'll dig in. At worst, it'll dig in and like a dart into a dartboard, but the wood itself will just get nicked by the sharp edge of the chisel, and it won't destroy the edge of the chisel as long as you've only got one chisel in the section. I suppose if they were all flat chisels, you could probably stack one or two or three on top of each other, because as long as there's something holding them down and stopping them tipping up and down, if you see what I mean. Because if they're all stacked on top of one another, the blades can't actually come into, the sharp edges can't come into contact with each other. But if you're making yourself a case, it's almost a presentation case as well, and having one chisel per section, and you could stack them that way, for example, if you want to get more in. But presentation wise, they kind of look better that way, so you can see which chisel it is you're looking at. But the wood would be perfectly fine for it. Just make sure you're not trying to put this in something this long so it goes, you can get some real force into moving backwards and forwards. Something like that, perfectly fine. Yeah, you don't need to clamp them down, lizard sole. I mean, this one is loose-ish, if you see what I mean, but it's not rattling backwards and forwards 6 inches. It's a sort of, it's the sort of thing that if you put it down, and then you stood up your case, you don't want the chisel sort of sliding forward 6 inches and impaling itself, which of course in here it can't shift enough to do that. So just that sort of space. They're all virtually identical lengths, by the way, of these chisels, the flex cut chisels. So that's quite a nice thing for a box, in that you can have all the same, roughly the same sized openings. But you could just do something like, if you had sort of like a 1/4 inch, or a 1/4 inch recess, if you like. You took a piece of wood, 1/4 inch recess, which you could use a router for example, to cut out the space for the chisel to go into, and then your lid, just have a foam sheet over the in the lid, if you like, or bond it to the lid that comes down over the recess, which sort of seals it, but isn't sort of you don't need to put force onto the chisel, if you see what I mean. You don't actually need to hold it down, clamp it down, or anything like that. If it bounced up and down a little bit like this, not really a problem. Okay, yeah, they're stacked on their ends. Yeah. Yeah, when you slide the lid in, when you slide the lid in, it stops them lifting out like that because there isn't enough room for them to lift out. Yeah, that sort of thing would be fine. That's not particularly a problem. All you need is a fairly fine saw, because a hacksaw is probably too wide, or even a coping saw is possibly too wide to cut the slot. Just thinking, no. Yeah, I was just thinking some of the blades are somewhat thin. I take something like that. As you can see, they're all roughly the same length, and they're actually all the same width at this point here. So I'm guessing when you that vertical piece of wood that they're all slotted into like this, when you cut it down, just make sure you don't cut it all the way to the bottom, so to speak. So you leave that lip there, and as long as the lid or whatever stops the blade riding up enough to slide backwards, then you're fine. Yep. No, I mean it's a box that they sell, and I suspect that is actually a flex cut box. So it has been designed by them to carry the chisels safely. So copying the design is using the design as an inspiration for your own version would be perfectly acceptable. Of course, you couldn't copy the design, that would be copyright, but yeah, as I say, you don't need a lot of pressure. It's, if I was to take this and drop it onto a concrete floor now, then I'd damage the blade, if you see what I mean. So from here it'll stick in the wood at this sort of level. I'm about 6 or 8 inches above. I don't kind of want it to do that. It's really just a case of stopping them driving too far. Anyway, I'm going to put that back in there. They're not, I mean, that design isn't too bad for getting them out, because of course here I've just put it away. I'm going to get it out again. They're stacked like that, so you're getting it out like that. You're not going to be near the blade surface. The only difficulty with that particular design is seeing which blade it is you're picking up. But it works just as well. Anyway, I wish you luck with whichever way you try to do it. Yeah. I shall put that over there for now. I am now going to stop the stream, ladies and gentlemen, assuming there are any ladies and or gentlemen watching. It's now 5 past, almost 10 past 11 in the UK, and I need to clear this lot up and clear the floor up as well, which has got bits of wood chippings all over it at the moment. So I want to say thank you to everybody who has watched this evening. It has been fantastic having you around, chatting with you, and having you watch what I'm doing. I of course encourage you to click the follow button. If not for no other reason, then in theory Twitch is supposed to notify you when I go live, which will save you the problem of trying to work it out for yourself. And of course, if you don't trust Twitch but would still like to follow me, then you are, of course, I will say of course, welcome to follow me on Twitter. The details are below the stream window, but it's at @ZeroGunArt, and whenever I go live, a tweet does go out. As I usually say, it's about the only tweet that gets sent, so you won't be deluged. You won't get lots of tweets from me. I'm not one of these people that sends a tweet out when they eat a sandwich or anything like that. But if you really do just want to drop in the next time I'm around, then I generally stream from approximately 8 PM each night in the UK. That's 1900 hours GMT. And if you're feeling a bit laid back and you don't want to ask Google what that is in your local time zone, take a look at the clock right now, see what time it is, subtract 2 hours and 10 minutes, and that would be the time when I would have started streaming. Occasionally, or from time to time, I will be streaming on Saturday or Sunday afternoons. That's from approximately, I don't know, 2 PM in the UK. Given that it's now 11 o'clock ish in the UK, you can do the maths on that one. I suspect I will be on this weekend and making some chainmail jewellery. Normal stream on a Saturday night, and a Sunday night will be the carving. We'll carry on with this, which is now making quite good progress. I'm quite pleased with that. So thank you all. I'll hope to see you again on a future stream, and have a good day, good night, good evening, whichever is appropriate to your time zone, and cheers everybody.